welcome everyone to this panel. The government policies, frameworks, and regulations, we all agree, play an important role in shifting orbits in the ag supply chain, be it improving farmer incomes, be it better quality of food on our plate, be it feeding the billions of us and the food security thereof, of course, and doing all of this in a climate resilient fashion without compromising on our net zero objectives and other sustainability pillars. The right policies, frameworks, and regulations have a potential to change the course of our nation, and it already perhaps has to some extent. The participants on the panel have done their bit to help shift the orbit. We will hear more from them. Over to Hemendra, the moderator, to introduce the participants and guide us from here.
Thanks, Ranjit, and thanks to Stellup's team for partnering with ThinkAg for this wonderful seminar. And we've got a great panel today. Everyone has been an expert on the policy. I don't think anyone need an introduction, but I'll do my bit to introduce them briefly. First of all, we have Shri Tarun Sridhar. He's the Former Secretary, Department of Fisheries, Animal Husbandry and Dairying with Government of India. Sridhar sir has been instrumental in introducing the famous venomized shrimp culture in India, making India one of the global leaders in shrimp production and exports. He's done phenomenal amount of work as bureaucrat. There's a long list of achievement, but in interest of time, I'll move on. So welcome Sridhar sir to this panel. Then we have Shri Sudhir Goyal ji. He's the former Additional Chief Secretary, Agriculture and Marketing with Government of Maharashtra. And he has again played a very important role in Maharashtra, attracting over $1 billion of investments in the integrated value chains. He has extensive experience of working with in various projects funded by likes of World Bank, ADB, IFED. So Goyal sir, welcome to you as well to the panel. It's a pleasure to have you. Then we have Mr. Sandura Ganpati. He's the PSA Fellow, Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India and Senior Visiting Scholar, Hawk Institutes. He's currently focused on building national programs in the livestock sector, which include a comprehensive digital architecture for the sector, streamlining regulatory processes, and building an integrated national disease surveillance program, among others. So clearly very, very important program. So Mr. Ganpati, it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining us. Then we have Mr. Dushyant Tyagi, is the CEO of FarmGate Technology. FarmGate Technology is a partner to the government program called eNAM, E-National Agriculture Market, which I'm sure all of you will be aware. He's an agribusiness leader with over 3 decades of experience across various agri-value chains, and he's been credited for spearheading the implementation of eNAM program and has been a strategic partner for the government for more than 7 years. So Mr. Tyagi, it's a pleasure to have you. Thanks for joining us. So great, we'll get started. Of course, Ranjit has already given the context. But let me also take a couple of minutes to set the context, and then we'll get on with question and answers. Clearly, role of policy, who can deny it, for driving the robust rural economy, which is the topic of the day. And as we all aspire to grow India's GDP in the range of 7 to 8% and probably more, I don't think that growth can be achieved without making the whole economy very inclusive. We can't have cities growing at 10% and villages growing at like 5%, right? So for inclusive growth, a rural economy also has to play a very important role. And when we talk rural, at the core of it is agriculture and allied industries, especially animal husbandry. Right? So I think that is where we will be focusing today's discussion on. In my experience, and as we all know, policy has already played a very important role in the sector. We can all recall Green Revolution, which drove the food security for the country in 60s and 70s and 80s. Then we saw white revolution, which drove the integration of the entire dairy value chain through cooperative movement. And I think we all are milk surplus today, thanks to white revolution, which got started in 80s by visionary like Mr. Kurian. And then, of course, we had the National Horticulture Mission around 2005-06, which Government of India started. I also worked with Government of India at that point of time. And as a young professional, I was very skeptical why government is spending so much of money and effort on horticulture. And it's 17 years later, I realized, how important that was in driving the production and the value chains for a lot of horticultural produce. And as we all know, the production stands at about 340 million tons on an annual basis, higher than staples, which is quite fantastic. So many such initiatives, and clearly, as Ranjit mentioned, it has played a role in driving food security, food production, productivity, farm incomes, and very importantly, also creation of jobs in rural areas. That is so very important from a policy perspective. Even if you look at recent times, I see a lot of government effort in building the physical and digital infrastructure when it comes to agriculture and allied industry. We see schemes like AIF, Agri Infra Fund, almost 1 lakh crore allocation for promoting farm level infrastructure, creation of warehouses, processing, which is at farm, near farm. We also see the ambitious project from Government of India called AgriStack, digitizing agriculture, creating farm ID, farmer ID, and crop ID. It is work in progress, but I'm sure once it is in practice, it will create a lot of interesting innovations. It will be like a seabed of innovations which can happen on the back of AgriStack, which government is planning to make it open source whenever it is operational. And of course, from a startup perspective, clearly, the government support for agri startups through incubation, seed funding, also the accelerator fund, which got announced in the recent budget by the Honorable Finance Minister. It's a 500 crore fund to support agri startup in their journey, especially in the early stages. So I can go on and on, but it's a very, very comprehensive list. And we have seen how policy has impacted the sector. But again, there's a huge role. And that's what we want to discuss today in the panel. And with that, I'll get into the panel discussion. I'll begin with Sridhar sir, and I will request his views on, again, what is the role of policy in the current environment in driving the rural economy, especially agriculture and elite sector. And if he can share his experiences in some of the challenges in policy making and implementation, both at the central and the state level. So Sridhar sir, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mathur. In fact, I was dreading this, that you'll ask me to open up. Okay. No, I'm quite a bit of an optimist, as also a bit of a cynic. Whenever I describe Indian agriculture and the livestock sector, with which I have very closely worked with in the Union of India, Government of India, as also in the state government, I'm reminded of the same famous Dickensian quote that it was the best of time, it was the worst of time, it was a spring of hope, it was a winter of despair. On the one hand, Indian agriculture, as also Indian dairy and Indian fisheries, Indian poultry, is a saga of great success. Today the young people and the younger generation talks in terms of the information technology as the symbol of the development and growth of India. I would say the real symbol and growth of India has been the Green Revolution, the White Revolution, and the Blue Revolution. I think I can see all, barring Mr. Ganapati and maybe Mr. Mukundan, I can see others are balding like me. So they would appreciate the late 40s and the early 50s when, well, it will not be a hyperbole to say that when, like Sudan or some of the Central African countries, we too were on the verge of starvation. We were plagued by acute shortages. And today also PL 480 is a synonym of largesse or arms being distributed. So we were actually importing wheat also of a third grade wheat, which today we don't even give to our livestock as feed and fodder, on extremely humiliating terms. From there, within the next 3 or 4 decades, by way of the intervention of our farmers and very great intervention of our scientists and zeal and commitment of our professionals some policymakers and some implementers that today we are in a state of surplus. We are one of the biggest wheat producers in the world, biggest rice producers in the world, one of the biggest fisheries producers in the world, and the biggest by volumes and by the biggest milk producer of the world. So it's a history of great success. Now, having said that, we should have graduated from absolute production, absolute productivity to value. Even today, we don't talk in terms of value of our agriculture produce. We don't talk, we say we produce 210 million tons of milk. We don't say we produce milk worth so much. We don't say our single cattle gives us milk so much. So I think the time has come that in terms of policy, we need to graduate from numbers and volumes to value and quality. That is one. Second is we, in our thinking, and this is even when I was in that position. Well, maybe some of you may feel that probably now that I have retired, I can say anything, and that would be a correct thing. But we always feel that infusion of funds, and Mr. Mathur, you were also mentioning in terms of various schemes. The whole concept of scheme is how much funds we have allocated and distributed. We somehow mix up giving subsidy for a particular activity or even investing in something as actual financial investment. So we need to distinguish in terms of policy. My very strong belief is a robust and strong policy which creates an environment and ecosystem for the real stakeholders in the system to flourish in terms of agriculture and animal husbandry, for the farmer, for the livestock farmer, for the fisherman, the fisheries farmer to flourish. He doesn't feel any obstacles or restrictions, and people across the value chain flourishing. You mentioned, although it was a hyperbole, I was happy that you were praising me so much that I was instrumental on this or that. Let me assure you, all this happened in spite of me. We become the biggest producer of shrimp in the world in spite of me. But if there is a contribution, what I would say is we have not given a single paisa subsidy to the shrimp sector in the country. We have given subsidy to several sectors, even in fisheries, but not to shrimp. And only shrimp has made us the global leaders. Today, we are exporting fish worth nearly 60,000 crore rupees per annum. Amongst all the agricultural commodities, because it is the single largest export commodity. Second is basmati and then followed by buffalo meat. They are way behind shrimp. And we are the undisputed global leaders. We just share the first and second position with Ecuador. We command for 26% of the global market of shrimp. How did we do it? We did not give a single paisa subsidy. All we did was gave them a policy which allowed them to fly, which allowed them to grow, and gave them the infrastructural support which each and every farmer and a hatchery operator could not. So in terms of the policy for the agriculture sector, which includes the animal husbandry, dairy sector, we have to shift our focus from a subsidy culture to a policy which allows entrepreneurship. And if you give me time, I'll just take 2 minutes more. At the end of the day, agriculture sector, including animal husbandry, which includes fisheries, poultry, everything, is a food production system. Why don't we think in terms of as a food production system, which could be a very viable alternative vocation and profession for a large number of people? Why can't we create an environment wherein when you ask a school child to write an essay, my ambition in life, or a young man, what do I wish to do when I grow up? He says, I wish to be a farmer. I wish to be a poultry entrepreneur. This is the kind of policy and environment which we need to generate. We started giving subsidy to the agriculture sector in terms of huge subsidies for fertilizers. Where did we end up? We ended up in a reckless use of fertilizers. Now today, we have reversed our policy. We're saying natural farming, natural farming. Now we'll start pumping money into natural farming. So now we'll be reversing that. What we need to understand is subsidy is not necessarily investment in the sector. And investment in the sector is investment not only in terms of investment of money, investment of financial sources, but also investment of human resources, investment of intellectual resources, and investment of right kind of policies, infusions, and interventions. That is how we need to look at it.
Thank you, sir. Very wise remarks, and totally agree with you. Sort of a subsidy approach, build an environment and a framework to drive entrepreneurship. And I can tell you from an investor perspective and also an entrepreneur perspective, we have 3,000 agri-tech startups in India, and majority of them are dependent on a lot of entrepreneurs in the rural areas. Everyone works with micro entrepreneurs. So I'm very hopeful if you know, and I say for agri-tech to succeed in India, it can't happen without participation from local entrepreneurs. So, and none of it is subsidized. It's all commercial models, right? So thank you very much for your opening remarks. It's a great view on how policy can play a very important role. With that, I'll go to Goel sir. Goel sir, you have seen it all. You've done such phenomenal amount of work in the sector. I think one area which I would like you to focus on is the role of public-private partnership. I think there are so many areas where public-private partnership can play a role. So how do you see, as a previous bureaucrat and policymaker, how we can build a robust PPP framework for improving the efficacy of the policymaking?
Oh, great. So you have asked a question which is very dear to my heart. And in the fag end of my career, I realized that what I have been doing throughout my life was public sector alone, working with the farmers and keeping the private sector at a distance. As you know, in bureaucracy, the private sector that time was considered to be something where you can't dwell with and without facing some kind of an allegation. So things have changed. Now, is there any policy for public-private partnership? Yes and no. Today, if you see the National Agriculture Policy, which was announced in 2007, followed by now you have 14 volumes on doubling of farmers' income by Ashok Dalwai, talks about these kinds of things in a greater length. But in terms of actual implementation, you find that there are hardly any, I would say, interventions which are in this direction. Even in the last budget, Honorable Finance Minister Ma'am has announced public-private partnership for extra long staple cotton, and the guidelines are yet to come. So only policy pronouncement which is there today in this arena is public-private partnership for agriculture, integrated agriculture development as a part of RKVY. Now what it says is that you are supposed to spend 30% of 70% of normal RKVY expenditure, that is 21% of the annual allocation on PPP. There has not been in 1 year where even 5% of this money has gone into public-private partnership. Now this, from where this idea has come up. In agriculture, for that matter, I can say for education and health and many other sectors, we have spent all our energies on building up the verticals. Now, in agriculture, there are so many verticals. If you go to the universities, there is a seed sector, there is a fertilizer sector, nutrient, you talk about machinery, and so on and so forth. But you will not find even one department dealing with value chain. So when I say verticals, we have become strong, and there is absolutely no horizontal integration of these verticals, neither in the private sector nor in public sector. The private sector and an entrepreneur would try to do this kind of a convergence by themselves. But in terms of a partnership, there is no such framework. Now, this framework is still being there, which clearly says that private sector and public sector can work together in a value chain mode, has remained, I would say, totally unutilized. It started in 2012. Maharashtra did some work for 3 years. Then it was followed by Karnataka for a few years, and then Andhra, and now a little bit in Gujarat. This depended on the genuineness or the interest of the officers concerned. Nothing to do with the kind of a push which is being given either by the central government or the state government. So the good thing about partnership mode is you don't require more money. Now, whatever money you are spending today, either in agriculture, animal husbandry, dairy, fisheries, AIF, just say that this is the platform. You come here and you can join hands with each other, go for a value chain. We will provide you all kinds of government interventions on the single platform. That's all. This is the only policy. And now when AgTech is there, you talked about 3,000, the number recently which has come up in the survey of 92,000 startups, 4,600 are agri startups sanctioned, and 4,600 another food and agriculture, which will include those who are working on e-commerce and so on. This is the kind of number. So almost 10,000. And there are more than 20,000 FPOs. So it means that the farmers' collectives are there, the AgTech institutions are there, digital platforms are available, government schemes are there worth 1,50,000 crores. If you look at the animal husbandry, dairy, and also those which are with NABARD, the figure goes into 5 lakh crores. But there is no convergence platform per se. So the only recommendation which I want to make is that where you can have verticals and then you continue to work in research as well as in extension on those verticals, next 5 years should be totally concentrated on value chain integration. And these value chain integration where you join hands with all the stakeholders in that value chain. Tarun Sal talked about the shrimps. It is because there is a value chain. In dairy, there is a value chain. In poultry, certain extent, there is a value chain. Seed sector, there is a value chain. But cereals, none. Oil seeds, none. Cotton, none. Fruits, none. Vegetables, none. Now, if we concentrate on this, this is the only policy pronouncement which will change the entire scenario of agriculture in the next 5 years. Just last 1 minute, when the Prime Minister says doubling of farmers' income, the Dalwai committee says we should grow at 10.42%. And Mr. Sudhanshu, Professor Sudhanshu of JNU says we grew 2.5%. Now, you can imagine, you can have 14 volumes, you can have verticals, but if you don't have horizontal, then please forget about having an increase in the income of the farmers. We will be talking about being number one in a gross terms, in per capita terms, per hectare terms. We will remain at the end of the spectrum all time to come. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Gul sir, for very interesting remarks, and totally agree on your point on value chain integration. And I think in some ways it is also linked to farmer income. I don't think it's going to happen purely on productivity and production basis. Farmer has to participate in the value chain. You know, instead of selling commodities, can they sell products? And instead of selling products, can they sell brands? Right? I think that is so critical. You know, to be in the part of the value chain. Rather than just a producer. So I think your points are very well taken. With that, I'll go to Mr. Ganpati. Ganpati, you have been focusing on livestock sector. I think it's a very ambitious and very interesting project that you have undertaken on digitization and disease surveillance. Can you throw some light on policy specific to livestock sector, given the fact that livestock income is becoming more and more critical for the farmers, including dairy, poultry, fisheries that we talked about?
Yeah, certainly. I am very interesting conversation here. And even though my background is as a veterinarian, I work mostly in the maternal child health and as a researcher. And only in the last few years, when I joined Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor, I've turned my attention back to the sector. I'm reminded more of the commonalities across sectors rather than differences here. And if you talk about livestock, one stark difference that I see is mixing it with, say, vegetables or crops, sometimes misses some of the unique needs the sector has. Oftentimes, when you talk about diseases, how to prevent them, how to be better prepared for future outbreaks, it has more in common with human health. And we miss if we don't bring those interconnectedness with human health, wildlife, etc. Something that now Government of India is addressing through One Health mission that I'm working on, how to be better prepared for future outbreaks, etc. So the other area that I see is better enabling policies. I feel like oftentimes the policies are lagging in time and space, especially in time, in that they are trying to address what is happening, since there is a lag in the way when you start thinking about a policy, and when you implement it, it takes few years. By then the sector has changed. So we should be more looking at what might be needed in the next 15 years. Then you will get it somewhat close to right in terms of what is happening currently. So, for example, we are working very closely with DHD, Office of PSA supported creation of a streamlined regulatory system. And it was quite interesting for me to learn how the regulatory system works, etc. Doesn't work, what are the deficiencies. If we don't see it as a space where it creates a common enabling bar, meaning you make drugs, you make vaccines, you make products, and how to make sure that those get approved in a timely manner, rather than they get stuck in some various approval process requiring multiple agencies in Government of India that are needed. Central Drug Control Agency is needed, DHD is needed, ICR is needed, so on and so forth. How do you streamline it so that things can happen much more quickly? And also, what I was talking about looking forward, there is a growing export market. How do you enable that? Because if I make good quality vaccine, I can make profit. And how do we enable it and see it as providing platforms where companies that produce good quality vaccine should also be foot and mouth disease vaccine, should be able to export it and make profit. Then we will be enabling this sector also, like human vaccine market, where India is a global powerhouse. And that's one area. And the other one is how do we now think about growing the sector from being very, as Tarun sir said, subsidy dependent. Now, there is we are not in 20 years ago how production was most on subsistence. Now there is a space for profit, where you produce something, you can actually both enable making of profit by selling that, and there is space for startups across various areas. So coming from government perspective, how do you build an enabling policy? For example, data. Who has access to data? So we need a comprehensive data access policy. And emerging technologies. How do you facilitate technology, which is a very interesting area for me. That's why I was involved in designing and implementation of National Digital Livestock Mission. How do you connect for animal identification and all the back-end digital system? So if in the future or presently, a company wants to introduce telemedicine, now, unless there is an enabling policy that allows for telemedicine technology to operate, work, and also charge for telemedicine. For example, as a veterinarian, I should be able to do the consultation and how that can be charged, how the payment can be done, and how that involves engagement with the sector and access to data. You won't let that sector take off. So oftentimes, I think I'll end with saying that there are certain unique areas where government has a role, and knowing where that unique role can be fulfilled and not interfere. I think if you let the sector grow, as Tarun said, I think many more transformation can be done. The UPI is a beautiful example where government created certain basic digital plumbing, basic common policies on how transactions will not be charged, etc., and provided a space for competition for people to come and operate and provide value to us as customers, and sector will take off. I think we should borrow from, I'm always interested in borrowing from such elegant ecosystem designs, which we can bring to this area and just let it fly.
Right. Now, clearly, we want to have some UPI equivalents in livestock and agricultural sector for sure. And hopefully this digital livestock mission probably is the right step in that direction. And I think you made another important point on how policy making need to move with the technological changes. There's always sometimes technology is far ahead and policy has to catch up. We've already seen with a lot of fintechs who come up with a lot of models, BNPL, etc. And suddenly there were regulatory changes and those models, became a bit more shaky once regulation changed. So I think it's a very critical point. I think we need to build a framework around that as well. So with that, I'll go to Mr. Tyagi. Mr. Tyagi, you played such a catalytic role in building Inam from scratch and what it is today. And of course, it can go far ahead from here as well. Would love to learn from you on policy related to agricultural markets that is so critical. Government has dual role. On one hand, they have to ensure higher farmer incomes, but at the same time, they have to control inflation. So in some ways, sounds contradictory goals. So how agriculture markets can be developed, enhanced, so that farmer gets access to good prices, more buyers, and at the same time we preserve, or we kind of make sure the consumer gets food at the affordable price.
So thanks, Hemendra. The problem is same. While implementing Inam and working on a very important side of the value chain, which are markets, the place where the entire effort of the farmer and the interest of the consumer are parked. So often, our understanding, conventional understanding is this: these are the places where farmers lose maximum value, and consumers, but most of the time, are not getting the right kind of a value for money invested in terms of fueling consumption for few of the items. So again, we basically our policy. I like. Sudhir sir has pointed out, you have verticals and there is a horizontal slice is missing. So for example, in our case, we have created a national market which has already crossed around $30 billion GTV in last 7 years. 209 commodities are trading there. Transaction quantum today is more than 80,000 in 3 hours trade window. So all the essentials of a marketplace are basically established. But what is constraining it to become a real delivering market is again, that policy, enabling policy structure. So for example, all of us know. So this, it's a selling from one state to other state. There are complexities involved, licensing, those kind of, investment is fine. But how to see regulation? Often I say I have worked for long on production side of the value chain. I have worked in the retailing side of the value chain and now market side. So if you look at everywhere, like Tarun sir has pointed out, we have created contradictions. For example, when we should have basically subsidized the output to ensure right realization, we subsidized input. That has resulted in a lot of anomalies in our production cycle. And you see a huge abuse of plant nutrition and crop response is going on. We are passing through kind of a productivity crisis, and we are far behind than many of our peers. So coming back here again to the markets. So we look forward for example, those 3 regulations. They were rightly placed, I would loudly say. If you have that kind of a facilitation, I just want to cite one example. Recently in UP, there was a crash in potato prices. Correct? The prices dropped to the level of 300 rupees per quintal, which is not even, the production cost for the farmer. So we requested, local state governments kindly give recognition only for potato, right? Reciprocity for the license of other states, because at the same time, potato was selling at 13 rupees a kg in Tamil Nadu. And believe me, a quick decision was taken. And this is what the enablement is. A quick decision was taken. A recognition for the purchase of potato was given to all the states. And we basically did a trade of 2.5 lakh ton in 3 days. And prices, firmed up from 300 to 650. So this is the power of enablement for regulatory perspective or whatever. More than that, now, see, taking markets forward, our understanding is very clean, and all of us know any marketplace, basically, you have to have more options to buy and sell. You should have a fair, price discovery mechanism Once the price is discovered, transaction is made, you need a mechanism to basically enable that transaction. You need some mechanism to basically finance that transaction, because markets are run. No car makers can survive if you don't have someone to finance it. No cell phone maker can survive if you don't have a enabler to finance that. So you need enablement in finance. That again, there comes a question. A lot of effort are being made by our startups, but where they are stuck up again, there is a policy constraint like Sindhura pointed out. Data is a public property, but for long we are waiting for a policy where we can exchange data seamlessly and harness that for the use of different users. So we have to enable transactions. Then deliveries are important to have a real performing platform. So then again, there also you need a conducive for policy framework. So unfortunately, agriculture in India, regulation is becoming counterproductive. The time has come when we as a fertilizer, basically we are into plant nutrition, plant protection, water management everywhere, including technology. So for long, we are advocating that let us liberate this sector also and let it allow to walk on its feet, and it will attract more, let us make it more investment friendly, and we have generic strength. Our farmers have generic strength, but those, gaps, basically those connecting, dots we have to join somehow. So technology is definitely going to play a role there. And yes, rightly, I foresee we will be witnessing a lot of value platforms coming in, commodity-wise, everything. And ENAM is configured to basically, we have platform of platforms, anyone can come, plug in here and extend services.
Thank you, Mr. Tyagi. Thanks for your views on the agriculture markets. Clearly, a lot needs to be done, though we have made a good start, but to enable more transactions, for farmers to participate, I think we need to do a lot more. It is so critical. Great. So I'll go to Ranjit. Ranjit, one of the pioneers in the dairy tech sector, done very interesting innovations. So can you give a practitioner's view on the policy? Of course, dairy is one of the most organized sectors in the food value chain. But what policies can drive, let's say, quality of milk, right? That is always a challenge. Cattle nutrition is a challenge. We see a lot of challenges around animal health, which Mr. Ganpati also alluded to. So how do we build a more comprehensive framework to trigger better productivity, good quality production, more value addition, more digitization, so that we leverage the opportunity that we have being the largest producer of milk?
Yeah, thanks for that, Hemendra. And as the panelist mentioned, what we've been trying to do is, move away from a very verticalized thinking to a more value chain thinking, right? Starting from the pre-harvest through to where the demand is, a demand backward thinking, so that there is more value-based pricing options available across the supply chain, right? And fundamentally, what we've been trying to do is solve for productivity, quality, and traceability. And they're all very interlinked. While doing so, we realize that there's a lot of policy nudges, regulatory frameworks that are needed and that are already in place, but more needed to help move in that direction in a big way. One specific point that Sridharji mentioned is the shrimp industry. Zero subsidy, and they sort of flourished. Can we do that in the dairy industry, right? Multiple states have 3 rupee, 4 rupee per liter, subsidies. Either provide subsidy to the private and the cooperatives, or don't use the taxpayers' money to do any subsidy. Let it go the shrimp way. Let milk go the shrimp way. Let there be a level playing field, and let the free market forces play out. That's not the case, and we do struggle as a startup sometimes to see that we don't have the benefit of a shrimp entrepreneur. I wish we did. We don't have that. Tyagi mentioned technology. Dr. Sindhura, who I've known for a while, he mentioned about using data and technology. Today, he mentioned about UPI. Interesting. I like when Sindra said, can we replicate, build on top of UPI-like frameworks? Direct farmer payments is still not a reality in India. The money flows through intermediaries. While we have these UPI frameworks, IMSS, NEFT, NPCI, why isn't that after we grade and price, why isn't that the money flows directly into the farmer's account? Why can't he look at milk as currency? We still see that it goes through someone sitting and running a society, someone sitting and becoming an agent, but it's not directly going into the farmer's account because he's a producer and he better get that price digitally in his account. That doesn't happen, and there are technologies available today to do it. There are frameworks available to do it. A policy nudge can happen. At the end of the day, no matter how much we talk, if money can get into the farmer's account, you will see a change in the farmer's behavior. Otherwise, no matter what we say, and for that, all of what we said needs to translate to money hitting his account. And a basic fundamental building block is to ensure that any payment that happens, can that happen transparently, directly into the farmer's account? Veterinary interventions, so many interventions, again, to the cooperative channel, we see that it gets subsidized. The veterinary doctors on the government side are the only ones rendering the service. I think we need to take a little more all-encompassing free market approach, wherein the private players are allowed to provide LSD vaccinations, for instance. All of you've seen when the lumpy skin disease came through, there are vaccination drives, but it was only through the government setup. Why isn't that the private sector not party to it? So I think when we shift from a quantitative sufficiency mindset, where we are trying to solve for quantity, as Sridharji mentioned, the wheat anecdote many decades ago, importing third quality wheat, that's sort of to meet the quantitative sufficiency requirement. We are beyond that today, right? We can think value chain, we can think demand backward, and hence a value and quality based approach rather than the typical metric ton thinking needs to go away. And this also ties into what Goelji mentioned about thinking a value chain, demand backward, rather than a quantitative sufficiency sort of thinking, right? Export came up in a big way. We do export to Sri Lanka, we do export to neighboring countries, but why isn't that we're exporting to countries where there is a higher propensity to pay in the form of cheese, in the form of residue-free products, in the form of large amount of Indian diaspora who are willing to pay for desi ghee so that our farmers can get paid more. So I think cold chain becomes very important. I see a lot of schemes that Hemendra mentioned about that is in there, but why isn't some of those schemes percolating down to certain steps that the private sector can take? For example, we are trying to move cold chain closer to the farmer, right? And talk about doing ease of business. Every of those cold chain points needs a FSI license, right? And it's not very digital, it's not online, a lot of gray areas. And when such things happen, you're left to the whims and fancies of the local implementers for us to get some of this cold chain going. So what are we saying? Are we saying that let's not fix the cold chain issue in milk? Let's have centralized chilling systems and just be self-sufficient and maybe export it to third world countries. That's actually the indirect message we're sending. If we are making life difficult, to move cold chain closer to the farmer so that farmers can benefit from better cold chain. Today, it's significant deterrent. Each state has an individual FSI licensing regime for the cold chain. And sometimes you sit back and think, why am I trying to solve the quality problem? Let me be happy, put up some centralized cold chain mechanisms, and let me just skimp above the bar that the FSI has set, right? So I think, like in the case of shrimps, if you are to export, also encourage policy-wise, regulatory framework-wise to push the cold chain closer to the farmer. So I think Financial services, another one. We spoke about data. We spoke about technology. Again, Sindhura referred, Dr. Sindhura referred UPI. Dr. Tyagiji referred, using technology. 60 to 70% of the farmers whom we deal with are new to credit. And they do need working capital financing. They do need term loans to buy more cattle. So there needs to be, we are part of an RBI innovation hub. So we're trying to come up with ways to ensure that these farmers, and as Tyagiji mentioned, financial services is going to be a very critical part, critical enabler to make any supply chain work, right? And hence, we need a nudge here on saying how alternate data can be used to underwrite credit risk better. So I think that a lot of what the team here have mentioned, the panelists have mentioned, I think we run into it every single day. So while it's good to say you need to do value chain thinking, you need to focus on exports, there's a lot that can be done. And we have examples. If shrimps is a proven example, why don't we take some leaves off the book from shrimps? If on the urban side, if UPI is worked in a particular way and if some of the data is used to write credit risk better, as Dr. Sindhura mentioned, why don't we use some of those learnings into the daily supply chain? So while we've attempted to take a value chain thinking and break the verticalized approach, I think you run into roadblocks that we need to fix within the realms of using some of the regulatory frameworks. Hemendra, over to you.
Thanks, Sanjay. You touched upon multiple aspects. This, the fact that sometimes getting a license itself becomes a challenge. It's not that a lot of startups don't want, but the process itself becomes extremely heavy. FSI license. I know a lot of agri-input e-commerce players, because for keeping the inventory of seeds, fertilizers, agrochem, again, you need licenses. But the process is sometimes so cumbersome that they also find it very difficult to get those licenses. So if we have made life simpler for someone who's applying for a driving license or a passport, why can't we do it for some of these things? I think that digitization of the processes itself, forget the policy for a minute, even digitizing some of the approvals which industry and startups need, I think that can also make life easy for a lot of startups. So let's hope we can pass on that message to the policymakers. Sridhar sir, there are a couple of questions for you in the chat box. One is, what specific things that you do to change the farmer behavior, the shrimp farmers' behavior to grow this sector? So if you can throw some light on that. And I think what Ranjit mentioned, what can we learn from shrimp export? We have very minuscule dairy exports. We have very minuscule horticulture export in the context of the opportunity. Are there some learnings which we can use to drive export in some of these value chains which are still very virgin from an international trade perspective?
Okay, I think I would not try to be didactic. I'll just tell you the shrimp story. Now, I don't know how much time do I have. There's a story fascinates me. When I joined in the year 2008 as Joint Secretary Fisheries in the Ministry of Agriculture, I did not even know Air Force fish. I had no idea what fish is. I was not a vegetarian. I had my forays of eating fish, but every time I would eat fish, something would get stuck in my throat, and it would be a traumatic experience. So then I vowed I will not eat fish. And lo and behold, I was posted as Joint Secretary Fisheries. And it just so happened when I joined, this was a burning issue that more than 50 to 60% of the shrimp farms had been closed down. Shrimp hatcheries had been closed down. And our entire seafood processing industry was working at a very suboptimal level of processing capacity, suboptimal level of capacity. So I had this people coming in deputation that, well, major crisis had happened. Then I found that the file with respect to introduction of Venomized shrimp had become this big. It was become impossible to even physically handle that file, and nobody was taking a decision. Now, I just thought it would be a good idea to have all the diverse stakeholders sit together. And my first meeting with stakeholders within a couple of weeks of my joining landed up in fisticuffs. Anti-Venomized and pro-Venomized people coming to fisticuffs, and they said, alien shrimp, how can this happen? So I realized that it was basically more of an ideological battle And because of the sheer politics and populism which is dictating our entire agricultural sector, people have taken very harsh positions. You see, I didn't do anything. As I said, I didn't want to understand anything. All I did was I brought the scientists and the practitioners together and said that you are both equal stakeholders. Let science and traditional wisdom and knowledge be blended into one and decide. And thereafter, we took this decision that, well, when I must come. And the only thing we did was, when it came, the farmer, the hatchery operator, the processor, the marketeer, and the scientific institutions who were till then all at loggerheads with each other, they were all holding adversarial positions. They all became allies. That is all I did. Maybe I think if I was successful, I was only a successful negotiator. Nothing more than that. Now, having said that, which Ms. Mukundan also mentioned and recognized, we were very conscious that we are not going to spoil them by giving them infusing subsidy. Once we start giving them money, we said, okay, what do we require in terms of policy? Now, why it was successful was our entire regulation was made after intense consultation with every stakeholder. So tomorrow, nobody could say that your regulation is stifling me or your laws are stifling me. Everybody was an equal partner in that. We took some more time. So that is one of the major things. Second thing is, we never talked in terms of livelihood. What is the problem is, and Mr. Mukundan also very rightly mentioned, we talk in terms of Garib Kisan. It is a livelihood. We talked in terms of prosperity. We talked in terms of prosperity, and we did not talk in terms of a hereditary vocation. We talked in terms of a profession of choice. You choose, like today, you see youngsters in urban areas, a lot of, as Mr. Goyal also mentioned, a lot of startups coming into poultry, all this. But they're all coming into infusion of technology market. Nobody's actually coming up on picking up the till and started tilling the land. That is something is mentioned. So what we did was that suddenly, because of these interventions, shrimp farming became sexy. So many people, after doing IIT, etc., they started actually investing, buying land and started doing shrimp farming because they found that there were markets all over the world. Now, having said that, what I'm wary about is complacency. We are very, very complacent. We get very complacent. Today, the same shrimp industry, which in one decade grew at more than 1,000%, is in danger. Within this period, a small country like Ecuador overtook us. In fact, 2 years back, there was a very interesting article in one of the international shrimp magazines that in the International Shrimp Olympics, India relegated to silver. Ecuador wins the gold. Suddenly, Ecuador pushed up because they started quietly doing it. We again said, because shrimp, now there was a whole mad race of everybody getting into shrimp without looking at the sustainability of this. Interestingly, I don't think anywhere in the world, the word sustainable is used so much in policy as we do it. But nobody elsewhere, we do the least about what sustainability should be. So now, in fact, tomorrow, day after, there's a food conclave in Telangana. So they've called me to just say, when will be the next Vanamai movement in this country? No, I don't know. Mr. Mukundan mentioned, well, why can't shrimp be in milk? Yes, why can it not be? We need to think. We produce, say, 210 or 215 million tons of milk. But this milk is produced by 22 crores, 30 crores of cattle. This should be produced by 1/4 of the cattle. Only then we can say that we are actually the best. Again, coming back to Dickens, it's the best of times in terms of production. USA, number 2 in the world, is half of us. But worst of times when it comes to productivity. Our Gir cow in Brazil gives you 50 liters a day. In India, the best of Gir cows doesn't give you 10 liters a day. So when we take pride, and rightly so, with agriculture, dairy, which has been great success, we also need to simultaneously introspect. Is it our case of mass production or just production by mass? And now we have the dubious distinction of being the most populous nation in the world. Now, whether we should clap at it or again restake it, how much productivity should this population have? That is the issue. In production, we'll be absolute. In productivity, will be. So that is why we need to move from quantity to value. Quantity to value. volume to value. And from food security, green revolution, white revolution, laudable achievements, food security. Now food security is not an issue. Now it's nutritional security. We have enough starch. In fact, we should start now reduce our consumption of starch and move towards the proteins and vitamins. And in terms of that, that is where the entire policies should be geared at. What Vanamai taught us was entrepreneurship. It is create an environment wherein a farmer becomes an entrepreneur. He's not a farmer because his father was a farmer. He's a farmer because he has chosen to be a farmer. This is what, again, I just say very, very simple. Make it sexy. And in fact, I've worked with Mr. Giriraj Singh only for 2 months. So whatever people might say in terms of his political personality, in terms of his political background, other thing. But one thing I really liked about his very earthy statement he made, he told me, Secretary Saab, ये सब तभी काम ये होगा गरीब को पैसे का स्वाद चखा दो, उसको पैसे का स्वाद लग जाएगा ना, तो अपने आप ही वो खेती बाड़ी अच्छी करनी शुरू कर देगा. So that is what you have to show to the farmer's son. Well, if you do farming, you can change your smartphone every year. You can get the latest edition of smartphone and whatnot. That is how it. I don't know whether I've answered the question or not.
No, sir. And thanks for being an advocate of entrepreneurship. I only see the problems getting solved through an entrepreneurial approach, and I think some very interesting points, volume to value and food security to nutritional security. I think this is how the policy should move from here. Thanks very much for your comments. With that, I'll go to Goyal sir. Goyal sir, you mentioned about FPOs, FPCs. I think that's another big policy initiative by the government, an ambition to create 10,000 FPOs. And of course, we made a start. There have been mixed results. You're sitting in Nasik, and Sahyadri is definitely, one of the successful FPCs, and everyone wants to replicate it. What is needed to make this FPO ecosystem flourish? Of course, entrepreneurship is definitely one part of it, as Sridhar sir said. But what else can we do to have more Sahyadris in the country?
Okay. Thanks. Sahyadri flourish with zero subsidy from government. Point number one. Point number two, take government out of value chain, things will start happening. Now, the question is that if the private entrepreneurs keep on thinking about what government is doing, the rate at which the progress will take place will remain what it is. Now, the time has come that there are enough players in the market to work with, to have such kind of localized value chain initiated. Now, I would just give an example. What stops Ranjit to have his platform and technology multiplied at 10,000 locations in the country? Now, we are not thinking in private sector from the point of view of multiplying our successes. Why should we keep on taking a position that the multiplication will take place only through me? Only I will do it. Why can't I, Eko Aham Bhavusyami? Why can't Ranjit create another 10,000 Ranjit? And if we keep on waiting for that to happen through government, the rate at which the agriculture will get transformed will remain the way it is. So let the government do what they are doing. Let you and me keep on saying what they should do. But they will continue to do at a pace at which they have been doing, or maybe a little better. But does it mean that the farmers of this country, after waiting 75 years, do not have a solution? Where do I sell my produce at a remunerative price? Or what is the solution for my natural calamities? And how do I recover my cost? Now, time has gone into, and I think the private sector will start thinking that government will do what they are continuing to do. We'll keep on educating them at our level, but we will not wait to get the prosperity multiplied, because our clienteles, if they don't have enough income generated, our own existence is at stake. All input companies start talking about monsoons, that what will happen to me if El Nino effect becomes very strong? Is this the way to do a business? So my request is all success stories, whatever number is there, their number is quite large, can get easily multiplied if we start thinking of creating a cadre of enablers, a cadre which we say facilitators. It should have been done by government. If the government is not doing, let us create that cadre. Who created the cadre of consultants? Who created the cadre of architects? Why can't I have a value chain architects in the market? Let there be an architect who is taking Ranjit's technology down to the below, that you go to him and the fellow will charge something, not free, as a business. So my proposition is that whether they are FPOs are weak, but FPOs require enablers. FPOs require facilitators. That enablers and facilitators will not come from government. Government is not thinking in that direction. Those enablers, let them come and get growth. This cadre, if that cadre gets formulated in our country, whether it is through entrepreneurship, whether it is any agri startup which is successful, they want to reach and multiply, let them create and see to it that this cadre is there, and that cadre starts working at the grassroots level. Farm laws, when they were formulated, probably could have accelerated this process to have localized buyers and sellers platforms. Then in that case, ENAM will remain not a national platform. There will be platforms which are there at the taluka level, at the district level, at the regional level. The same thing this has happened in case of dairy sector. You have localized dairy for taluka and district level. So this multiplication will take place. Next revolution will come through private sector. The government sector will continue. Only thing I pray to God, that they should not disturb when the prosperity is reaching at the doorsteps of the farmers.
Thank you, sir. Very wise words. Enablers, facilitators, absolutely right. I think that is what we need to make FPO successful. And I think clearly private sector has a job to do there. Mr. Ganpati, one question you on this digital architecture for livestock. I think there are multiple digital stacks which have been created by the government, of course. Aadhaar based stack, we all know, on which multiple APIs are being built. But there are concerns around privacy, governance. Also, how do you make it accessible to private sector? What is that framework for sharing this data with private sector so they can build some interesting APIs over and around it? And you also mentioned, and Ranjit also mentioned, for this fintech models to successful, which is unconventional models or data-driven lending, unlike PSL lending. A lot of data needs to be generated and shared, for underwriting, for example, and if those data already exist, why don't we make it available to the banks and financial institutions so they can lend more efficiently to farmers, be it crop loans or cattle loans and stuff like that. So would love to have your views on it.
Yeah, certainly. I think that the whole space of data is quite underdeveloped. The practitioner of how data standards are developed, how our policies developed. I think that is something I've been working now with some of the like-minded people in and around the government to see how we can put in place a good framework there. We will be generating a lot. We are, and in future it will increase a lot of data. There, instead of taking a view of deciding which parts of the data needs to be made accessible, I think it should be the inverse of it. In that, what needs to be held back because of privacy concern or because of certain other aspects of, there are other issues for in terms of validation, etc., that until you do it, you don't want to make it public. Those tend to be very small. If you put all broad umbrella under data, most things can be made accessible. So instead of saying, what do I provide and make accessible, we should take a view of what needs to be held back for certain reasons, so that people who need it have access to it. And we should trust it in the hands of people who generate data. So there should be a consent model. And then let the system take over. So we become enablers of data made accessible. And then we don't want to presuppose how and who will use it for what purposes, because the variety of utilization can be quite different. And if there is changes in diseases pattern, a researcher might use it for doing a master's or a PhD. A private sector company might decide to build a R&D facility to make a vaccine because they're seeing increasing trends. Another set of private actors may be thinking of on the delivery side of it. So it is by presupposing, oh, we'll make this data accessible only for this purposes, we will block the utilization that we cannot foresee. So that's why taking the view of making things more accessible rather than deciding what to make, that is something that we should really do and think about. And the other thing is data standards. Just dumping information in Excel sheets don't get us very far. And that's something I've been thinking about, how we get it there, so that having common data standards will allow us to use data more liquidly, in the more liquid format, so that different aspects of information can be combined and value derived from it, which I cannot foresee. In that, what was the, keeping the same example of disease outbreaks, I should be able to combine that with geographical location, with species location, in which species it is spreading, for example, or what kinds of serotypes are emerging, or overlay that with multiple 10 other aspects of data that a person who wants to use it for a different purpose should be able to. That's only possible if we have clear data standards and mechanisms to make that accessible. So this is where I think policy and technology will come together. And my final message, thought process and message is that we should think about more from open, starting with that perspective, that every data should be public, and then ask which needs to be held back, rather than starting with what do I make it. Thank you.
Great. No, that's a very good perspective. I think that will probably solve some of the data privacy concern that we have. Mr. Tyagi, two questions to you. One which has come in the chat box. Do we need to have a long-termish view on agriculture? So someone has asked, should we have Vision 2030, Vision 2040, so that at least we know the direction in which policy is moving? Is that possible at all, first of all? And if yes, should we work on it? And second, I think related question, one big challenge that we have for agriculture, livestock, everyone, is climate, right? Do we need to build up? Of course, there are a lot of things which is happening even within the government to drive climate resilience. The multiple governments, multiple departments and ministries working on it. Can we build a comprehensive framework for climate, including carbon trade, including climate resilience, innovations to drive water use efficiency, climate financing, insurance? I think everything is linked, but scattered in some ways. So would love to have your views.
So coming to the first question, I think two things I just want to summarize. Yes, I mean it is we live in an open source age, so that very proposition, thought of proprietary, I see melting down very soon. So see, like we say in our ancient learnings also, wisdom, valuation, and wealth. More you share, more it will multiply. This is what we follow here, and that is how I mentioned that data is a public property, and rightly pointed out by we have to see what should not be access to, because that will accelerate all these startups a lot. because people will approach the problems from different perspectives, for example, underwriting the risk. So there may be a number of models people are experimenting, but you don't have access to cadastral maps. So the whole proposition goes for a toss the moment you say this cannot be shared because a number of reasons. So reasoning is at 100%. I believe it's very much important, and long term, short term, and medium term, all is important. And country has done it in last 70 years of glorious achievements. But I cannot agree more than that. This is the time is not for the quantum. It is for the quality of whatever we do with our agriculture and our farms. For example, you look at the soils, completely dead, almost near to dead. 1 kg of nutrient applied in 1971 used to give us 13 kg grain yield. Today, it has dropped down to below 3 kg. So I mean, when we talk about climate issues, sustainability, definitely we need a comprehensive view on it, not the compartmentalized. If we create a mission, that will not help. We have to think across the value chain, and then we have to basically break down each part of this value chain into small deliverables. For example, pre-market. So a lot is to be done. Which crop is to be sown? The game starts from there. How your soil is. So a lot of scope I see for the planning and execution. Now with the help of technology, it is very much possible that you can make a framework and you can monitor it in real time. And across geographies, we have roughly 155 crop clusters in India. So now we as a corporate, we say no more products, only solutions, customized solutions, solutions customized to the extent of the geography, soil, seed, everything. So the going forward, yes, we need to plan more, and it is very, very much possible to plan it and to have a vision and chase it. For example, in exports, we focused in last 2-3 years, and we can see the results. So now, for example, we discussed about the quality of our produce. It is very much quantifiable. Now startups have come, those who can give you 100% repeatable, 100% verifiable result in less than 1 minute. So I see, for example, climate is a big issue. We see rains are happening in Kanpur today, and this is the harvesting time. A lot of loss is happening. Every February, we are taking a hit for last 3 years. So time to think deep. And we have to readjust our crop cycles. We have to think about the crop refitting in the crop. Farmers are doing it right now, their own, with their wisdom. So in most of the wheat belt, I see wherever the possibility is there, they are advancing the sowing just to avoid, this rise in temperature in the February or untimely rains and hailstorms, etc. So my quick take or broad view is this. This is very much possible. And I agree with Goel sir. I mean, constraints are there and they will always be there. But we have to learn how do we share our wisdoms, how do we share our success stories. Given all the constraints, it is very much possible. For example, in ENAM, there are regulatory constraints, but we are now engaging with the states at least to have reciprocity of the license to facilitate the trade. We are trying to create a network of verified buyers and sellers, and we are trying to bring as many as platforms as possible. Going forward, we foresee commodity-wise platforms coming in, state-wise platform coming in, outside the mandi platform coming in, export platform coming in. Framework like ONDC, they will further make things better. So this is over to you. I mean, this is how the future looks like.
Thanks for that optimistic note. And with that, we come to the end of the session, and really thank all the panelists, Sridhar sir, Goel sir, Mr. Ganpati, and Mr. Tyagi, and of course, Ranjit. Ranjit, would you want to make a closing remark and just thank the panelists on behalf of Stellar?
Thank you everyone for all the insights. And as Goelji mentioned, to see a reasonable impact in our lifetime, it can't be closeted approaches. It needs to multiply by an order of magnitude, so that at least in our lifetime we can see some tangible progress happening. And this needs to happen in spite of the government. in spite of the policies. I think those will continue to chug along. Anything quick happens is a good bonus, but don't count on it. If it happens, it's good. But if we'd like to see progress in our lifetime, you try to multiply it, create new cadres. A lot of talk about, chat GPT. All of us must have, every conversation starts and ends with it. How do you leverage, some of those and equivalent enablers so that in our lifetime we're able to see some significant changes. Not everyone would be as lucky as Sridharji. He has seen a big change in the shrimp sector, and he's able to sit back and now say how it worked. But I wish in all the other sectors where we all work in, we're able to see some significant, tangible thing happening and not wait for 50, 70 years. Our first white revolution took 70 years. I don't think the next one needs to take that long. How can we make that happen? And I think we had a good discussion. Hope to pick your brains, seek your guidance, and see how to make that happen in our lifetime. Thank you so much, Hemendra, for guiding us on this.
Thank you all, and
Thank you,
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
audience also.
Bye.
Thank you.